justice for all. Living healthy on a planet spinning out of control. You're aware of the issues, you've got something to say. Diversity in living every day. An open mind can unlock any door. Maybe you just want to know the score. Log on. St. Kermit.com.
Greetings, everyone. It is October 7th, 2016, and St. Kermit is back. We're on a roll here, 2 weeks in a row. Again, good morning to you, George. Good morning to you, Tony.
Good morning, gentlemen.
What's good?
So we are going to talk today about public education, and this is somewhat put forth because of the ballot question here in the lovely Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which, if approved by the electorate, would allow an increase in number of charter schools. Now, we're not going to go down the path that John Oliver did on charter schools a couple weeks ago, but I actually want to talk about whether or not the public education system, whether or not we have more charter schools, is serving the students well. And so I'm going to sit here and start off by saying I'm torn about the question 2 here in Massachusetts, because the very progressive perspective, you asked all the progressive legislators in Massachusetts, they're all going to say they're going to vote against this because to approve more charter schools would drain money from the regular public school system and put those students at a disadvantage. But I come from a perspective that I think the public school system needs a kick in the butt in some ways. And I say that as a parent. 10 years ago, you may not know this, as a homeschooling parent. Both of my kids are now in college and having successfully never attended a public school in their life. And so I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to throw it to you, Tony, first. Why shouldn't we be looking to a charter school system as a way to provide an impetus for greater change in the general public school system?
Oh, I have two, I think, equally important things that I wonder about. And this is a really difficult issue, and I'm not sure where the answer is, but the two things I wonder most about is, one is systemically, our schools are still operating in a way that no longer fits our culture. Our present way of doing public education was formed in a time in our country where the daily realities of life, technology, all kinds of stuff were just not what they are today. And this is not just for education. I think we see this in politics, in medicine, in finance, in all our systems. They were designed for a time and place that no longer exists. So there's a lot we need to do in education. And as we were prepping earlier, George was saying, the teachers get blamed for everything. I think teachers are what's called in systems theory the identified patient, right? A couple goes into the therapist's office and they start talking about, well, little Johnny is doing drugs and getting in fights and he's flunking all his classes. Instead of talking about Johnny, the therapist says, so how's your marriage? And that's kind of what we do to teachers. Like, we don't want to deal with the real problems. And I think the issue of funding, here's my other pillar, the issue of funding is in some ways a mask. If we really wanted to treat the funding of public education, make it be public education the right way, we would find a way to equally fund all our public schools. But we don't want to do that because that's going to force us to confront the reasons why we want to put our money in our school for our kids, but not over there for your kids to have the same thing. And that's going to fall down to race and class like it always does in America. And as we see from the news every day now, we don't want to talk about that.
Well, you said something, man, you really crushed that one, Tony. Because you really summed it up about the systemic issues. The school system we developed came when most people we had a more agrarian society. We had summer vacations. Why? So that your butt could be out there, helping with the crops in the field. In the South, you were, kids, they were sharecropping with their parents. So we had a school system that accommodated that reality. that reality doesn't exist anymore. Most people live in cities or live a city existence, even if you're in the burbs. So I think you are absolutely on point there. That's a systemic issue that we have to start rectifying at the earliest grades, which requires more money. You said something, Tony, that really piqued me when you talk about funding. Several years ago, this is about 2005, thereabouts, the late Derek Bell wrote an amazing book where his premise was, and this is a guy who fought, I should say, for integrated schools, fought ferociously for it for decades. And he decided later in life, maybe he was wrong. And he echoed a thing my father has always said. My dad grew up in segregated schools in Houston, Texas, FYI. And my dad would never go back to segregation, but he says integration per se isn't the same as desegregation. And ultimately, predominantly black schools that were very good schools, that had good teachers, if not great funding, suffered in the exchange, and then the kids suffered. Bell's premise was Brown versus Board of Education was wrong. We should have enforced Plessy versus Ferguson first, which said, you want to have separate, you damn well going to have equal. And he actually wrote a fictional Supreme Court decision that said, we looked at South Carolina and you're spending $8 for white kids for every dollar you spend on black. In Virginia, it's 16. In Mississippi, it's 30-1. Okay, this is what we're going to do for the next 3 years. We're going to have equal funding across the board for 5 years. If you do not have equal funding, we will then invoke Brown versus the Board of Education. I'm simplifying it. You'll have to find the book. Okay. If I can put a title, it will pop. But it really, the premise just kind of hit me upside the head because I'm like, wait a minute. Separate versus equal is not what we want to go back to. But the point was there was never equal. The Supreme Court said that separate's inherently unequal, and you get that. But the thing was, the equal was never tried, and as you point out, Tony, never will be tried because nobody wants to divide what they view as a pie that is increasingly shrinking in any case. But that's a huge problem. The other pillar I would have, and you totally blew up half of what I was going to originally talk about in the prep, Tony. But the other part I will say is that there's the inherent thread in homeschooling or in reforming public school system is informed parents and caring parents. My parents de facto homeschooled me to a certain extent while I was being bused to a predominantly white junior high in La Jolla, because my dad's like, okay, we got some supplements for math, supplements for history. Obviously, the history I was learning in history books wasn't the history that even kids are taught today. I'm actually heartened when I was substitute teaching and I saw them talking about subjects that we never would have touched in 10 million years when I was coming through school. But by the same token, we put too much on teachers and not enough on parents to be involved and activists and pushing forward their children's agenda, and not the agenda that my child is perfect, you know, how dare you hurt my child's self-esteem by giving them a less than adequate grade. But in terms of what can I do to make my child better, let me stay on my child, take the burden off teachers from being the therapist, the psychologist, the cheerleader. All that's going to play anyway. But when the teacher becomes the primary source of support for all of this, there's something fundamentally wrong with that picture. And the ironic part is most charter schools I've come across or heard about, regardless of what you think about them, they insist on activist parents, right? You just can't dump your kid off in a charter school the way you did in a public school and not have the charter school go, we haven't seen you, Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith. We haven't seen you at the child's performance, right. at the conferences. If you're not coming, your kid doesn't need to be here, right? So I wonder, like Tony, I believe you're going to have to see some fundamental changes on a societal, almost the DNA of society's got to change on how we approach education.
I think that's absolutely the key issue here, because even if we reject the charter school ballot question here, great, so we keep that funding issue. You've already touched upon the funding, but the schooling itself, the method of education is not likely to change. There's this great video which I shared with George Antonio that I did by hip hop artist Prince EA called "I Just Sued the School System," and it's an indictment of the way we teach kids today. And it makes a lot of good references, and I'll try to put a link in the video so people can find that. But one of the references he has is to schooling in other countries. He specifically references Finland, where they say they pay teachers adequately, they don't have as much, if any, homework, and that the schooling is done in a sense of collaboration rather than kids trying to compete for, all right, only some people can get A's, some people have to get C's. That's not the method of schooling. And I really think that that's a model that we have to consider here. And again, I'll go back to the homeschooling experience that I had with my kids. And again, I'll preface by saying that we were privileged enough to be able to have that opportunity. So with that said, I mean, when we were homeschooling, when the kids were younger, we were doing so partially in a cooperative, quite literally in a homeschool cooperative, where the kids were working together. I mean, there were no grades given out, but kids were being taught. And they may have been taught history, or they might have been being taught how to cook Indian food, but they were being taught something. And they were all sort of gobbling it up and really enjoying the process. And then I look to my kids, and this also applies to other kids I've known who've been homeschooled. I'll use my daughter as a specific example. She went to community college for 3 years in lieu of high school. Just started college this year, and I'm so proud of her. But the school that she's going to, the college she's going to, has accepted most of her credits from community college. And so she is essentially a second semester sophomore in college, having done, so to speak, no more schooling than any other high school student out there. And so I look at that and say, why doesn't everybody do that? Now, again, not everyone is as privileged as me and my family have been to do that. But if the kids in high school and my daughter are getting essentially the same thing, yet my daughter is results with a 3 semesters worth of college experience, why can't we work toward improving our education system so that all kids have that same chance? And it must be a chance. It must be a way we can do that.
Right. Well, and I would say, and here's where our, cultural battles over funding comes in, though. As George was saying, if you have involved parents, whatever educational situation you have is going to be better. But if we really want to invest in the public, in everyone's education, we owe it to kids who don't have good parents to give them as good an education, minus their parents' involvement, as all the other kids are getting. And you can't do that unless the funding's going to be there equally for everybody. And one of the things I don't like about charter schools is I think it pushes us further into privatization. We privatize prisons, the army, healthcare, whatever it is. And when we do that, we always take a sidestep or a step back from forcing the larger cultural conversation we've all alluded to about the things underpinning why school doesn't work for us anymore. When we push the ball back towards we're all in this together, which I don't think charter schools do, it's at least one more step, one more straw in the pile of saying we have to have a big conversation here. So I get torn about that. The opportunity for some people who might not have it's great with charter schools, but I wonder if it's the wrong Band-Aid. That's always my biggest question.
Because you are looking at potentially a 2-tier structure yet again.
Yep.
Where, and now you have a 3-tier, private, public, charter. Because charter is different from your conventional private schools. But I think the conversation we have to have will have to start, and you'll have to have success with people who would be in the quote unquote have-not pile. Because the people who have, they're going to go the homeschool route like Jim has, or they're going to go like 2 of my good friends from high school and college who went to public school with me, but put their kids in private schools. And I joked with, actually it wasn't a joke. I asked my friend Mike, how much did it cost to put his boys through private school in Randolph? And I think it was over $30,000 a piece. And my jaw hit the ground and bounced. And all I could say after about 3 minutes was, dude, we went to public school and we didn't turn out so bad, man. I mean, come on, and he starts laughing. I'm like, and we went to I was in a magnet program, but my school had a reputation of being kind of a rough school. He didn't go to a magnet program, and he came out of a school that was considered pretty much your classical public school, nothing overly special about it. We both had the same scholarship program. He's done very well for himself, and he could put his kids in private school. Another high school friend, same thing, public school, engineering. He's quit engineering, does fantastically well in real estate. I'm trying to be him when I grow up. And both his kids, he has one kid who went through private school. She's now a freshman at UT. The other one is going through the school, and they're putting in that money. And the thing that struck me, told me, was she had got accepted to Carnegie Mellon. And you want to talk about cost of education, forget high school. College now is another level altogether.
Absolutely.
But it got to the point when we were discussing schools, he had hoped she'd go to UT because he's like, look, I can afford UT. I'm paying less for UT than I did for her high school education. What?
Yeah.
What type of world are we in where that takes place? And I can't, and the kicker is you can't blame anybody involved. Show me a parent that doesn't want better for their kids than they had. And if the perception is that if a fundamental part of being better is divorcing yourself from the public school system, and let's face it, most people make their home buying choices with kids on what? Quality of the school system, if it's possible. I've asked many people, why in the hell do you live in X? The schools are great, George. I'm like, okay.
Let me throw this idea out. Should the next ballot measure not be whether or not we have more charter schools, but should the ballot measure be about equal funding or even equal and increased funding, that a minimum of X percent of a state budget must be allocated to public schooling and it must be equal in all school districts? I wonder how that sort of ballot measure would rank up there with the charter school system.
It would get so roundly defeated, it wouldn't even be funny for the people who wished it went the other way.
Yeah, you have to be very worried, Jim, because more than a few people have. I've heard this, okay? I don't have kids. Why should my tax dollars go to funding? And I'm like, Jesus. I mean, sorry, Tony, but I'm like, we have always made a fundamental agreement in our society that our tax dollars, even if you don't directly benefit, it benefits the common good, right?
Exactly.
I don't necessarily drive on every single highway in the state I'm in, but the tax dollars are going to go to them. And I have had more than a few people go, I don't have kids. When I have kids, I'll pay for the education. I don't have kids. What the hell are you talking about, right? And we're seeing a shift where people are saying, I got mine, get yours, I'll worry about mine if I need it later. That tax benefit, that ballot measure you're talking about, I'm with Tony. We got the crying blanket over here for you, Jim. You want a blinky? I mean, because that's getting smoked, okay, with a capital S. And it pains me to say that. I'm with Tony on this one. It's almost like the military. We have to have a changing hearts and minds campaign to fix this problem, because you're talking about something in the societal DNA where people are basically viewing public education as a nice to have, not a necessity for a smoothly functioning, evolving society.
Well, and I think the challenge is, and this is one of the things that was in that video I referenced, is that when we talk about a smoothly functioning society, what do we mean by that? And again, that video referenced, once upon a time, a smoothly functioning society was all about getting people to work in factories. Mm-hmm. And that isn't necessarily what that should mean today. And that's the one of the shifts in your Hearts and Minds campaign. It's not about let's get it smoothly functioning. It's that in my mind, let's accommodate each child and their learning style and their learning interests for all the importance that STEM has out there, science, technology, engineering, math, that if Right.
Or
Well,
STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, art.
Arts. Well, that's exactly my point.
Whatever.
No, but the arts are important. But so they're all important. And the point is
Right.
that we need to, if there's a kid, George, who wants to learn history, and that's what they're really good at, we should embrace that and not necessarily say, yeah, but you only can have one class on history. You have to do all these other things. Let the child run with what they love. If someone is a great engineering student, let them run with that. And if someone knows how to dance, by gosh, let them dance.
Well, part of it is. Go ahead, Tony.
And part of trying to reform education is getting public education to function in that way, Jim, is going to cost money.
Exactly. Yes, indeed.
And so we eventually get back to, why do we unequally fund? We unequally fund because when it gets right down to it, there was a piece on local NPR yesterday about the Metco program, busing kids of color from Boston out to the rich suburbs that started 50 years ago. And the reality they got down to, and they were talking to people who were graduates of this program, saying that when the rubber hits the road, even the white liberals don't want to send their kids to school with people of color.
I would say it's the whole NIMBY thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, black people aren't so bad at a distance. Trust me, I've been I've been on the receiving end of that. But you hit on something I want to come back to real quick, Jim.
So quickly, because we got to finish up.
Okay.
Here.
Smoothly running society back in the day meant factories. Well, guess what? We're not driven by factories anymore.
That's right.
And I think one of the great lies of omission that are told by politicians of all parties is, we're not going to have the manufacturing base we had in 1950 through 1970. Get over it. It is gone. It is dead. It will not come back ever. We have to retool, and the education system has to retool with it to give kids a fighting chance. And we don't say that. And it's a lie of omission that is killing us as a society. Because when you realize that, and you realize that the conventional high school education you got with Biff Tannen and George McFly back in 1957 is totally null and void, and you've got to, you okay, Tony?
Yeah, that's good, George. That's good. I like that.
And we have to have a 21st century educational system deal with 21st century technologies and a 21st century society. We'll start making progress. And that is a parallel. That is not mutually exclusive from what you two are talking about with the funding that has to go to all schools. And that's also teaching people not to vote against their best interests. Good luck with that one.
Like you said, George, people like us, we like paying taxes for public education because we don't want to live in a society full of stupid people. But there are a lot of people who benefit from a society full of stupid people.
Right.
Yep.
So I'll leave it at that, gentlemen. Good to see you both. We'll convene again. Thank you all. And if any out there still watching, please send us your thoughts and comments. We now have our website up, albeit simple. stkermit.com is back. Glad to have you all. Have a great day, folks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.